Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, there's been some discussion amongst some of the elite Linisty guys about Linux Mint should die. No, Linux Mint should not die. I'm going to talk about why Linux Mint should not die. In fact, a couple weeks ago, I did a video called Why I Am Not a Linux Elitist. And in that video, it was really about why I use a computer to get work done. I don't use a computer because it's my background hobby. And so that's really what we're going to look at. So we're going to look at a few different areas here in the Linux Mint video. We're going to try and keep this as short as possible. I'm probably going to talk faster than usual. My apologies if you're unfamiliar with me. I used to be a college professor, so I can be loud, I can be fast, and I can be long-winded. I'm going to try not to do that. So number one, we're going to look at some of the Linux Mint myths. Number two, we're going to look at why I like Linux Mint. And number three, we're going to look at what I do with Linux Mint. And number four, we're going to give my final conclusion of the article we are going to look into. And so before we dive into the Linux Mint myths, let's talk briefly about this TechRepublic article. So the article, James Sanders, who I don't know anything about his work, he says, Scientific Linux and Antergos are shutting down. It's time for Linux Mint to go. So if you read through the article, and it is linked in the description, he talks about how Linux Mint became so popular. How did it become popular? It responded to user needs. People liked the Windows layout. It wasn't because they're resistant to change. It's because it works. That's why it was a predominating desktop for so long. Linux Mint came out with something that works when there was chaos in the desktop environment. Gnome 2 switched to Gnome 3. People didn't care for the Gnome 3 shell. Ubuntu went to Unity, and Mint's like, people like the old stuff, so let's develop something. Now, there's always Mate and XFCE that duplicate that, but Cinnamon brought a modern UI feel to that old format. And I myself, I know I don't resist change because I hunted around and tried all these different desktops and learned how to use all these different desktops. No matter what, for my main production work, I always go back to a layout just like the old Windows system, which is Cinnamon, Mate, or XFCE, but Cinnamon has the most modern feel, the most modern customization, and that's why I like Cinnamon. So he talks about that. He also talks about the old days of Linux. It was very hard to get things working out of the box, mostly for licenses. And Linux Mint said, we don't care. We're going to do what helps the users out. And so those two factors caused Linux Mint to grow. But now what happens is these guys and some of the Linux elitists are calling for Linux Mint. They're just saying, oh, it's just Ubuntu with Cinnamon. So get rid of Linux Mint, pull Cinnamon out, just make it a distro agnostic desktop environment and call it good. And then all you guys that are working on these Linux Mint things, you guys just go off to work somewhere else because Ubuntu's here to stay. Just go work on Xubuntu instead of Linux Mint XFCE. That's literally what they're saying. They talk briefly about Linux Mint Debian Edition and how Linux Mint Debian Edition is just dead and doesn't have a point. We're actually going to get into all that. So let's go ahead and tackle number one. Let's get into our Linux Mint myths. Number one, Linux Mint is not secure. Joe Collins did a great job of countering this myth. There are a couple of factors here. Number one, the website issue. February 2016, there was a hack on the website and somebody uploaded a malicious copy of one of the ISO images. And if you actually did what they recommend, download the ISO and verify it, you would have seen it, would not have verified, and you would not have used it. For 6 hours, they had a incorrect ISO on their site. They corrected the issue, they fixed the hack issue, and they fixed the ISO within a matter of 6 hours on a Saturday afternoon. Okay? So that's not really an issue. Everything has been hacked, and everything is going to continue to get hacked. Hackers, unfortunately, are part of this world. Now, as far as the operating system itself, is it secure? Absolutely. There was a time, again, Collins mentioned this in his video, there was a time when updating a kernel could completely destroy your system, and so Linux Mint held back kernel updates. They gave you a tool that you could update the kernel when you're ready, and it was separate from the update path. So you could actually manage the kernels, you could do it, but by default, it kept the same kernels so that the system would not come crashing down. And so they focused on their philosophy, which is simplicity and streamlined rather than the absolute latest packages. So Linux Mint is secure. And by the way, the latest versions of Linux Mint, those are all completely resolved. Every one of those are completely resolved. They get the same kernel updates because updating your kernel is less dangerous now than it was. Nobody has informed me of that because I'm still running like 4.15 or something on this computer. Oh well. Let's look at myth number two. Linux Mint Debian Edition is dead. doesn't serve a purpose. That is completely not correct. In fact, right now I'm running Arch on my backup system, and which is my media PC. Prior to running Arch, I was running Debian, Linux Mint Debian Edition when it was just released a few months ago. It's actually just been released because it follows Debian stable. And because it follows Debian stable, it upgrades about the time Debian stable does. Now, that doesn't mean it's just all old and crusty. It means that it is rock solid stable and gets all the security patches. As soon as there's a security vulnerability, it gets that security vulnerability. Linux Mint Debian Edition. So what is it and why is it? Linux Mint Debian Edition is because Linux Mint team, because they're cognizant of their users, looks at the direction Ubuntu is going and says, they may not always be viable, we need a backup plan. Linux Mint Debian Edition is that backup plan. If Ubuntu, and by the way, it's not, is Ubuntu going to die? It's, what if Ubuntu goes full on corporate Microsoft owned, which some people have hypothesized is a direction they could possibly be going. If that's what happens, Linux Mint team will say, put more time in the Linux Mint Debian Edition. Because there's things that Ubuntu has been doing lately the Linux team does not agree to and have pulled the system out, such as fingerprinting your system on install, the data collection, the popularity contest installed on default. These are things the Linux Mint team has not done. Linux Mint Debian Edition is their way of going back and having a look at what happens if Ubuntu, our core base, is not viable. They have a stepping stone. You take any other distribution basing on Ubuntu, they are either going to have to go the way of Ubuntu or die. Linux Mint Debian Edition is their way of having a backup plan. That's called forethought. Number 3, this is something that was mentioned in one video. Linux Mint Debian Edition stole from Banshee. Yeah, I looked into this. What ended up happening is there is a donate button, and Ubuntu at one point in time changed the affiliate link so that if you used the support button through Banshee, the royalty share would be split. And Linux Mint attempted to do the same thing, and they goofed up the code. They broke their affiliate link and kept, they broke the Banshee affiliate link, which goes up to the Gnome project, and kept theirs. They racked up an amazing, massive total of $3.41. And when the issue was discovered, they gave it back, or at least they offered to give it back. Why bring that up? Because you don't like Linux Mint. I don't know. All right. Number 4 myth. You can't support any other desktop. That is incorrect. I actually have videos about how to put KDE on modern Linux Mint 19. I have videos about how to put KDE and Budgie. Now, I think I did Budgie also on Linux Mint 19. I have videos on how to put KDE on Linux Mint Debian Edition and upgrade the kernel to kernel 5. All right. You can do all this kind of stuff because it's based on Debian. Anything you can do in Debian, you can do in Linux Mint Debian Edition. Anything you can do in Debian, you can do in Ubuntu for the most part. There's a few little odds and ends. Are they not? They're not officially supported. The reason they're not officially supported, the reason KDE was dropped from an official distribution is because Linux Mint has a philosophy, simple and streamlined. KDE removed the ability to be streamlined. We didn't have the ability to have everything working together. KDE messed under the hood too much. You can still put it on. You can still run it. I have a Linux Mint 18.3 KDE system running in full production. It's just fine. All right. But the fact is, you can support other desktops. So those are our 4 myths. Linux Mint Secure, Linux Mint Debian Edition, Linux Mint Stole, and Linux Mint can't support other desktops. Those are all handled. They're all done. You can install them. You can fix those. Those are not issues. Now, why do I personally choose to use Linux Mint? Well, because of, it has to do, I'm going to turn on a virtual machine, so my desktop audio is going to beep there for a second. My apologies. Actually, I'm just going to turn it down. There we go. So the reason I like Linux Mint, and when I first was looking for the best viable options for installing Linux on my system, what I wanted to do is I wanted to see how could I get the best similar workflow to what I already had. Well, very simply, Linux Mint is what did it. And so the reason I like Linux Mint is because with Linux Mint, I get a system that is very up to date, very modern, but has all the old UI elements that I liked. In fact, the only thing that the default has is the show desktop is over here instead of at the very corner down there, but we can actually easily change that just by, dragging that over there. Let's go ahead and fix that. There we go. Now my system is set up just like an old school Windows. Now, in the TechRepublic article where they talked about, they talked in that TechRepublic article and they said, hey, listen, Linux Mint, they were good with the codecs, they were good with keeping the UI, but they don't have anything, they don't bring anything to the table anymore. I completely beg to differ, because in Cinnamon 4, which is what this version of Linux Mint is running, they even changed this layout. I don't like this layout as much, but this is the layout that you get on a modern computer system, where these are, these guys over here, they're not the same type of pinned applications as they were before. They are, they're like pinned, not quick launchers. And I don't like quick launchers. I like pinned stuff personally. But regardless, the way the layout, the system works is exactly what I wanted in a system. And so for me, it resembles Windows, and the resembling Windows is exactly what I wanted. Because after experimenting with a variety of different desktops, I found that this is the one that worked best for me. All right, now next is we have the modern UI elements. We have the modern looks. Of course, we have transparency. This thing is very, very beautiful. It looks modern while having the modern functionality, but we also have things for those that are inclined to use it. We have things like online accounts. And I think I have my Nextcloud test user on the online account up here. So, we have online accounts. We have the ability to sync all this stuff up. And when you connect an online account to this, in my case, I'm using Nextcloud. You can do Google or these other ones. This will actually integrate all of your applications together. And so if I got to go back a month or two, I think we have to go back 2 months. Everything that's on my cloud calendar completely syncs with the desktop. It has all these modern UI elements that are very good. Now, the thing that, one of the things Joe Collins mentioned in his video is the thing that a lot of people misunderstand about Linux Mint. Linux Mint isn't just Ubuntu with Cinnamon. Linux Mint works hard to make sure everything works out of the box. Everything is unified. Something you don't get inside of Ubuntu necessarily. You can, and it's getting better. But what we find is the pre-installed tools allow you to do about anything, from formatting USB drives, writing ISO images out of the box, to we have Redshift to get rid of your blue light if you are so inclined to do that. We have the time shift system, which is for making a system restore points. We have a backup system, which is similar to Ubuntu's backup system. We just have a variety of different tools. On top of that, we have a unified look. There are custom readers for the image viewers, for the media players, all of these things that have a single unified feel. The same type of thing Elementary also does, a single unified field among the basic things that you might need to do out of the box with your system. So that is why I prefer Linux Mint. It has a similar user layout, a similar feel to what people want, and it has everything that works well and fine. And the thing about Linux Mint is it has a specific philosophy. It's guided by its philosophy of simplicity and streamlined. Simplicity and streamlined. It wants a system that is simple. It wants a system that is streamlined, that works out of the box. Hands down. And that's what they do. And that's what they do well. So why is it that a lot of people don't like it? In my opinion, it's because there's a lot of Linux elitists out there who they only want to have a system, and they want to get this big toy system. They want to see what their system can do. And they spend all the time getting some hard distro working on it, and then they do a few fun things with it, and then they wipe the thing out and do it again. The reality is, though, is that there are people in this world who have real things that we need to accomplish. Okay, I'm a web developer and an author. I have a stack of books here that are all completely written and produced, ebooks, print books, audiobooks, completely written and produced in Linux. I don't have time to mess with a broken system. I don't have time to figure out why the latest rolling update crashed my system. I don't have time to reinstall everything. I need a system that's going to boot up It's going to work. It's going to be consistent. It's going to be coherent. And everything I need to do is going to work, because some of us actually do have real jobs. It's really funny that the people tell us to go get real jobs, recognize that, yes, this is actually part of my real job. This channel is actually wrapped into my publishing company, in fact. And so with that, my task on this channel isn't to make Linux just out of reach for the common person. It's to bring Linux within reach to the common person. So what are the types of things that I do on Linux? Well, one of the projects that I have been working on in the recent days here is I have a new book coming out. And this book here, this is the book cover done in Blender. All right. So if I had to get this Blender copy working inside of a system that's constantly crashing, I would never have gotten this thing done. By the way, this entire book cabin is entirely set inside of a log cabin. But literally, this is what I had to do to build a book cover. This is about 30 to 40 or 50, I don't know how many hours of work putting this thing together inside of Blender, because I needed to have a system that works perfectly fine. And I got the system working the way I need it to work without tinkering with it, without things breaking. I'm also right now working on audiobooks. So I have Audacity going, Kid 3 going. I have all these things going in the background. I'm doing real work on Linux. As far as web design, FileZilla, Bluefish. This isn't a web design computer. I do have one of those set up. So those are some of the things that I'm doing on Linux. It's not to figure out how to get Linux working on everything. It's to figure out how to get my work done on Linux. And that is far more important than trying to figure out how to get something going. Far more important. So going back to our original article here, looking at this TechRepublic article, his basic approach here is he wanted to come in and just say Linux Mint doesn't have any purpose. I mean, Scientific Linux and Antergos are shutting down. Why are they shutting down? Well, Scientific Linux I don't know as much about, but this was part of the Red Hat type family Linuxes. They were, Red Hat, of course, I think brought on CentOS. My apologies if I don't have all this history correct. I don't follow this branch of Linux. And then, of course, IBM bought Red Hat. And so Scientific Linux didn't really have much of a purpose because CentOS was wrapped up into all this kind of stuff. Antergos, it shut down just because, my apologies if you don't like this, it really wasn't all that useful. Okay, the people that loved it. And if you got it installed, it was great. But this was the first time I remember seeing a Big Daddy Linux challenge where half the people came back and said, I couldn't get it installed. When your Linux guys can't get it installed, we got to go back to the drawing board. And, it was a very small development team. They had other priorities. They shut themselves down. But this article here, the guy talks about how Linux Mint has gone back and they set themselves apart in a few different ways. But now this says there's no way to set themselves apart, but they always are. They're always setting themselves apart by always having a backup plan with Linux Mint Debian Edition. They're setting themselves apart by keeping Cinnamon updated to mirror that Windows-like feel so that Windows users always and perpetually feel more comfortable coming down. So what's his final take? His final take is that Linux should shut down. All the people working on those special projects should go work on the Ubuntu versions of those projects. And then Cinnamon should just become agnostic. In other words, what this author wants to do is this guy's like a bully on the schoolyard. Bully comes up to the guy and says, give me all your money. Go away now. We want all the stuff that you brought to Linux that's good. Now go away. That's what his approach is. And it's bad and it's wrong and it's arrogant because Linux Mint is a great distribution and it has remained being a great distribution and it will remain being a great distribution. Don't steal its cinnamon like the bully on the schoolyard, but you're going to find the Linux Mint support is far bigger than your little bullies, so go away. You're welcome to borrow our lunch money cinnamon if you want. You can install it already on a lot of different distributions. No problem at all. But we're going to hold on to the rest of our money. Thank you very much.